Hi, welcome back to Money Talks with Misha. I am Misha, and today we're going over The Watchers. Well, episode 1 of The Watchers. There are going to be more people to watch and more things to keep an eye on, but I want to start with the Federal Reserve. All right, so today I have with me my list of notes. So if you see me looking down, don't mind it, okay? I just have my piece of paper because I have some lists, some things that I want you guys to know. And I don't want to get lost in the middle of my yapping and then you don't get the information that I want you to have. So you might be wondering why we're going over the list of Watchers, why we're doing episode 1 of Watchers and who these people are going to be. So the list of Watchers are going to be the people that affect our money, things that I think are very important, or groups of people, bodies, organizations, or entities that I find very important to our money, our movement of our money, the actualization of all of our plans, hinge on the behaviors of these groups of people. And so the first person or group of people on the list of Watchers for me that I'm giving to you is the Federal Reserve. Now you might be wondering, I've heard the name Federal Reserve before, but I don't know who they are. I found that I like the way that, side note, I find that I like the way this records when I'm holding it versus when it's clipped on me. So you're getting to be held today. I hope you like it. But you might be saying, I've heard of the Federal Reserve. They talk about it on the news, but I don't really know who they are. You're in luck. Today is about the Federal Reserve. So I'm going to put it to you as simply as I can based on the way that I understand it. The Federal Reserve is like the central bank of America. They are the banks of all banks. They are the bank's daddies. Okay? When the banks need a loan, they go to the Federal Reserve. They go to the central bank and they cut the checks for them. They're daddies. And that's the way I think of it, because the interest rate that you get from your bank is dependent on the interest rate that they get from the Federal Reserve. Now, why are we talking about the Federal Reserve? Because we're talking about money. Last video, I talked about inflation. I gave you a gist of what inflation is, how it affects the value of your money, but there are other things that affect the value of your money. The Federal Reserve affects inflation or checks inflation. So let's get into the function of it so that you have an understanding. I want to make sure that I lay a good foundation so that when we start talking about other things or start making decisions that seem a little bit high level, that you have the foundational understanding to keep up, and I don't have to repeat why I said it. Why am I doing this? Why am I not taking a loan right now? And I might say I'm not taking a loan right now because interest rates are up from the Federal Reserve. They increased the interest rate. And you might be like, well, what does that mean? This is the video for what that means. This is where you learn what that means. Okay, so the Federal Reserve, I told you earlier that they are the bank's daddies. Okay, they are a mixture of private and public in regards to how they're structured. So they have a board. Don't quote. Well, I don't know if I should call it a board, but I call it a board. This is how I understand it. They have a board of people that are elected from the government by the president. They decide who goes in there, and they basically play the function of monitoring our economy. They are the checks and balances of our financial market. So for example, if let's talk about raising interest rates, right? So you'll hear on the news, the Federal Reserve released their interest rates and they raised the interest rates. What does that mean for us as people, as small business owners? How does that affect us? Well, if the interest rate goes up, you're not likely to borrow. Why? Because if they increase the interest rates, then the banks are getting their loans at an increased interest rate. And if they're getting it at an increased interest rate, you are getting your loans at an increased interest rate. So it makes it less likely for people to borrow in that time. It cools down the economy and it kind of slows inflation. So if they see inflation's going crazy, I think in the last video I said inflation was 2.9%. 3%. I just use whole numbers for simplicity's sake. So when it's 3%, if it gets to 10%, which it probably won't, but if it gets to 10%, the Federal Reserve would be like, we're increasing interest rates. Nobody's borrowing anything. You guys need to chill out. we need to get this interest rate back down to a livable standard. You guys are inflating everything. We need to get it back under control. They pump the brakes on our economy. They make borrowing more expensive. And I told you it slows down inflation, but it helps us to understand what is happening when we hear the news. So if you watch economic news, if you listen to like Bloomberg, or if you're into like day trading and things like that, this is imperative for you to understand, because when these reports come out, it helps you to understand how banks are going to operate, which helps you to understand how businesses are going to operate, which kind of helps you to predict how people are going to operate. And that's what we need. When they lower the interest rates, then you would expect people would borrow more, because you'll get that mortgage at a lower interest rate. You'll get your car loan at a lower interest rate. There'll be less layoffs. People are less likely to lay off their employees because companies can afford more, because loans are easier for them to get. So more employment, less layoffs. There are a couple things in my research that I thought was important, because I know the Federal Reserve, I know of them, but how they function always seems to be a mystery to me. So I was trying to figure out, like, well, who are these people, right? Do we owe them money? As a country, like, do we owe them money? And then I got into understanding that they are the United States. They're our bank, right? And they do meet often. So they meet several times a year, and they just discuss the reports that they get from, looking down, their 12 regional reserve banks. So the country is broken up into districts. And because I don't know how to edit really good yet, I can't put like a map of America with the 12 districts. Maybe I can. I'll see if I can. But we're broken up into 12 districts. There are 12 National Reserve banks, one in each district. And they are responsible for lending and collecting money from our banks. And they take reports of how banks or each district is doing, and they send it back to Washington, D.C., and they kind of go over to get like an overview of the activity of the people of the country in a financial sense. Like, I don't know if they're watching us on YouTube. No, I'm kidding. No, but it gives a good report. That's how they get like consumer reports and things like that. I don't know if they affect consumer reports. Don't quote me on that. But I'm thinking that's how they would get consumer reports. They would understand which districts are giving out more loans, or people are spending more money, how the economy is doing by district. And then we can get a full breakdown, and they can make their determinations on whether or not they're going to increase or decrease the interest rates. I was looking, because it always seems like it just comes out randomly when they choose to increase or to decrease the interest rates. And it turns out they don't have a set schedule on which they do this. It's not like they're like, we're going to increase the interest rates in the first half of the year, and then we'll decrease it in the second half of the year, because the holidays are coming up and we want people to buy stuff in the holidays. That's not quite how they work. They adjust based on the needs of the economy. They are people to watch. That's why they're on our watch list, because they control the bank that we put our money in, and they affect our good debt and our bad debts. I know that was a lot. I feel like I just yapped at you, and it might have been a lot, but I just want to do a quick recap to make sure you are where I need you to be. Watch list person number 1, the Federal Reserve. Who's the Federal Reserve? The Central Bank of America. What do? They determine whether or not we need to pump the brakes on our economy. They determine how much money our banks get and at what interest rate they qualify. And our banks then determine how much money we get and at what interest rate we qualify for. They collect money from the banks when it's time for repayment. And they also they control funding, essentially. So we know who they are. We know what they do. We understand, hopefully, by now why they're important. And I'm hoping that the picture's starting to come together so you understand why they're on the watch list. We need to be able to hear the news and interpret it and then act accordingly based on what we hear, what we read, what we observe. So my goal is to expand our knowledge base, our foundation, so we have something good to build on. Because I want to be able to talk to you the way I talk to some of my friends. I say a thing, we have an understanding, we keep on going to the next topic. I hope this video was informative for you. I hope you enjoyed the new style of recording. I hope it wasn't too much information and that I didn't just yap your head off. If you have any questions that you would like me to clear up, if you have any topics that you would like me to go over, put them in the comments. Like and subscribe to the channel so that we can keep on growing in our understanding of finance and build wealth together. Thanks for tuning in. This is Misha, and I'll see you in the next episode.